Hello, my name is Mr. Wayne Costolny. I'm one of the registered dietitians here at Blanchfield Army Community Hospital. Today I want to talk about heart-healthy eating. Just give you some general overall principles on how to eat for a healthy diet. Well, you know that most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, will die of heart disease. It is a given fact that the leading cause of death in America is heart disease. Let me begin by just showing you what an artery looks like inside. If we were to cut open an artery and look inside, what you have here is 4 examples. Here on this side, you'll see an artery pretty much what it looks like at birth. It's nice and clear, blood can flow through there no problem, but you'll notice that there's a little bit of buildup of plaque on the inside of the artery walls. And as we get older, a lot of times in America and in westernized countries, we see more plaque build up inside the artery wall. This is not a normal process. This is a process that is a result of a westernized diet and a high-fat diet, a high cholesterol diet. We eat a rich diet that is very high in saturated fat. When we think about heart health, we think of trying to avoid cholesterol. Well, cholesterol, I'll just ask you a couple questions. Cholesterol comes from what types of foods? I'm going to name some foods. You tell me yes or no whether they have cholesterol. The first one is French fries. Do French fries have cholesterol? No. Most people will answer yes to that question, that French fries have cholesterol. If I asked you, do potato chips have cholesterol? You probably think, yeah, potato chips have cholesterol. If I asked you, does apple pie have cholesterol? Most people say, oh yes, apple pie has cholesterol. I've been teaching heart-healthy eating for many, many years, and every time I ask people whether French fries, potato chips, apple pie, bananas, nuts, whether they have cholesterol, most people will tell me yes. In all the years I've been teaching, I always get that answer of yes. However, cholesterol only comes from 2 food groups. It comes from number 1, meat, chicken, fish, and the second food group is the dairy food group. So cholesterol only comes from animal products. Your bodies actually produce cholesterol in the liver. So as you sleep at night, the body gets active producing cholesterol. Well, why does my liver produce cholesterol? Cholesterol is made in your liver because your cell membranes, every cell in your body, the outside membrane is made up partly of cholesterol. So when cells die and new cells are generated, it requires cholesterol in that process. The problem is there are certain foods within the American diet and the westernized diet that actually promote excessive amounts of cholesterol production in the liver. And the biggest culprit in the American diet is saturated fat. So most people have heard that term saturated fat, but to just give you a quick definition of what a saturated fat is and how to identify it, it is the fats that are solid at room temperature. So when you think about the types of fats that we eat, if, for instance, I take this nice hamburger, this is a 4-ounce burger, and say I cook this on the stove at home, and I take the patty out of the pan and I go eat my burger, and then I come back later and I look in my pan, I'll notice that that fat has turned hard. It's turned white hard. That is a saturated fat. If you eat too much of those types of fats, your cholesterol level will go up. Okay, so saturated fats are found mostly in animal products. There are a few vegetable sources of saturated fats, the primary one being coconut oil or some of the other tropical oils. So coconut oil, if you've ever seen it at room temperature, it's actually hard. It's white hard. It kind of looks like lard or shortening. It is extremely hard at room temperature. That will raise your cholesterol level even though it may be advertised as containing no cholesterol. If you take a food item, for instance, that's made with coconut oil, the label might say, made with 100% vegetable oil, contains no cholesterol, but not knowing that if you eat that item, it may actually trigger your liver to make cholesterol. So as a manufacturer, as a marketer of foods, very often you'll see on labels contains no cholesterol, but that food item may actually raise your cholesterol. So it's the saturated fat in the diet that actually raises the cholesterol the most. So when you're looking at typical food items, I just want to give you a few examples of how much saturated fat is found in different foods and how much you should eat in a day. Most Americans probably should eat between 10 and 20 grams of saturated fat maximum. Okay, if you're eating more than that, chances are your liver may be overproducing cholesterol. If you take a 3-ounce burger when it's cooked, it actually has close to 5 to 6 grams of saturated fat. Okay, well, how much should I eat in a day? Probably 15-ish, somewhere in that range. The lower the better. If you can cut saturated fat out of your diet almost exclusively, that would be ideal. You're going to get some saturated fat even in vegetable oils, but it's very, very low. If I take a slice of American cheese, this is about 4 grams of saturated fat. So if I take 5 or 6, and I take 4 more grams of saturated fat, and I have a typical cheeseburger, that's close to 10 grams of saturated fat in this burger. The recommendation for most people, 10 at the low end, no more than 20 for most Americans is what we should be eating. So the typical American burger has about 10 grams of saturated fat, but in America, portion sizes are getting larger and larger and larger. Now we have double burgers and triple burgers, and then we add bacon on top of the burgers, and then we have French fries with them. So all these things tend to increase the fat, and especially the saturated fat in the American diet. So in terms of heart-healthy eating, it's eating a balanced diet, but including more whole fruits, fresh fruits, vegetables, some whole grains into the diet, even adding some beans into the diet as a protein source instead of eating so much from the meat group. The typical American probably eats 10 to up to 16 ounces a day from this food group. Okay, so let me talk about this food group for just a minute, because this is one of the biggest culprits in the American diet. This here is 3 ounces. This is a 3-ounce chicken breast. This is 3 ounces of meat. Most American adults probably should not be consuming more than, say, 4 to 6 ounces per day from this food group. Well, let me hold this up for just a minute. This is 3 ounces. If you go eat somewhere and you got a portion size that looked like this, would you be happy? Well, probably not. Say, I want a little bit more than that. So you go to the restaurant, you're going to get at least 6 ounces of meat, chicken, fish on your plate, and in some cases more. I mean, you go to the steakhouse and you might order a 16-ounce steak. Most adults should not eat more than 4 to 6 ounces a day. If you're eating more than that, and you're taking in some dairy products on top of that, chances are you may be eating more cholesterol than you need, and on top of that, your liver may be overproducing cholesterol as you sleep at night. So it's really a double whammy. Okay, so the cholesterol is coming from 2 sources. It's coming from the food you eat, and it's coming from your livers, which produce cholesterol too. So if you eat something from the fruit group, the vegetable group, or the grain group, especially whole grains, they are cholesterol free. So in the American diet, we need to eat more of those types of foods in order to lower our cholesterol levels. So once again, cholesterol and heart disease, dying of heart disease is not natural. Okay? It is a westernized type disease that we don't find in 80% of the world because they cannot live the type of lifestyle we live in. They don't eat the type of diet that we eat in America, in Western Europe, and in some of the other industrialized countries where we see a lot of heart disease. So having said that, once again, enjoy food, but remember, there are 5 food groups. You have your protein foods, your dairy products, your fruits, your vegetables, and your whole grains. Make sure you're including the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and limited amounts of your animal products to help to control cholesterol. One of the questions that came up in the class today was, what about trans fats? How much of that should we be eating, and what is a trans fat? Well, there are no guidelines in terms of how much trans fat you should eat, but trans fats come from processed vegetable oils. You can take a liquid vegetable oil, such as corn oil or canola oil, and you can turn it into a hard fat through the process of hydrogenation. When an oil is hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, that is a trans fat. Typically on food labels, they will list trans fats separate from the saturated fats. So when you look at a food label, you'll see on this food label here, you'll see that total fat is listed as 12 grams, and then it has 3 grams of saturated and 3 grams of trans fats. So those saturated and the trans fats are both primarily solid at room temperature. They both promote heart disease, and you want to minimize your intake of both of those types of fats. So when you're looking at that food label, if it has trans fats, it's probably a processed food. So even though there are no guidelines on how much trans fat to eat, I would say eat as little as possible, and that would be just avoiding processed foods primarily to do that.